for attending here this morning. My name is Cherish Francis. I am the National Chiefs Press Secretary. I want to welcome you to the Algonquin Territory, and this morning here we have National Chief Cindy Woodhouse Nepinak, as well as Regional Chief Willie Moore from Manitoba, in the press conference this morning to discuss the budget. As you're aware, National Chief and Regional Chief were at the budget yesterday, and so we'll provide some analysis here this morning. So thank you, and we'll hand it over to National Chief.
Thank you. Well, thank you so very much. I'm just going to ask Regional Chief Moore to say a quick prayer, please, in your language.
Monsieur National Chief,
Well, thank you so very much for being here, each and every one of you. I want to recognize that we are on the territory of the Algonquin people and the Algonquin Nation, and I want to thank them for welcoming us to their territory and being so generous to everybody here in the Ottawa region. I also want to thank the Assembly of First Nations, our staff that have been reviewing this budget all night. I think I got a set of notes at 2:30 a.m., another set at 4:30 a.m., another set at 5:30 a.m. So I really commend our staff for working together and knowing the importance of every year when we have federal budgets. While we are still asking questions, we are able to provide the Assembly of First Nations initial response to yesterday's federal budget. Yesterday was a very important day for First Nations and for all Canadians. Yesterday was also the new government's first budget, their first chance to honor promises and obligations to First Nations and to all Canadians. Because budgets are not just accounting exercises. They are important instruments that governments use to deliver on their obligations to protect the rights of all citizens. Over half of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action have to do with education, and we will mark the 10th anniversary of the Commission's final report next month in December. Yesterday was the first anniversary of the passing of a great leader and a fighter for justice, Murray Sinclair, who is chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. So my heart goes out to his family as they remember him, and I spoke to his son yesterday, and we had a long discussion on some of his father's quotes. One of them, of course, Justice Sinclair always said that education got us into this mess, and education will get us out. And we are not there yet. The federal government talked a lot about generational investments leading up to this budget. With Justice Sinclair's vision in mind, the AFN's pre-budget submission invited Canada to make a generational investment in First Nations education and in training and in our languages. The most effective way to secure the future success of First Nations children and our Canadian economy is to invest in education. Canada's education system was used as a tool to try and erase our cultures, take our languages, and break our spirits. For the next generation, education has to be a tool that empowers First Nations youth and uplifts our children. First Nations are amongst the youngest demographics in this country. So sadly, yesterday's budget did not include any generational investments to close the First Nations education gaps that exist in this country. AFN's budget submission also called for strategic investments to close Canada's long-standing First Nations infrastructure gap. With the Conference Board of Canada, AFN has showed that generational investments to fast-track modern schools, quality homes, all-season roads, clean water, and reliable internet for First Nations communities would create over 300,000 jobs. The Prime Minister acknowledged the importance of this priority during the last election. He said that closing the First Nations gap alone would more than offset Trump's illegal tariffs. While there are still some important new budget investments for housing and for wastewater systems in First Nations communities, we hope to clarify those details over the coming days. And we are pleased to confirm that the $47.8 billion that we had negotiated last year for the long-term reform of Canada's discriminatory child welfare system has been protected. We lift up also Minister Mandy Galmasti for her support on these priorities and her leadership in protecting Indigenous services from a 15% budget cut that's happening across all departments. We'd fought hard for that, but it should not have been this difficult. But when the best we can say is that Indigenous services is only being cut 2%, we know that there's a problem, especially when provincial transfers for health, for education, and social services have gone up by 5%. The First Nations population grows at a much higher rate than that of Canada's, so not investing to keep up is a step backwards. Instead of closing the socioeconomic gaps between First Nations and non-Indigenous Canadians, this budget is going to make things worse. Ignoring those long-standing gaps and environmental standards will not help fast-track resource extraction projects. So we again, restate our call for a First Ministers meeting to chart a path to close these gaps before the next fiscal update in this spring. Premiers have made the commitment to meet, and I'm thankful to the premiers for their commitment to meet. Now we are waiting on the federal government. We have also, so we call on the Prime Minister to set that date for the, for next year, and we work, we're going to be pushing for that. We've also invited the Prime Minister to speak to the chiefs at our upcoming Special Chiefs Assembly, December 2, 3, and 4, here in Ottawa. At our recent assembly in September, it was in September, in the aftermath of Bill C-5 being rammed through Parliament, chiefs made it very clear that they will insist on our rights, titles, and treaties being respected by the Crown. These are real legal obligations of the highest court, protected by sacred treaty and entrenched in the Constitution of Canada and protected by international law. This budget was a chance to build some of that trust. Sadly, it has failed to meet that moment. We remind the federal government that First Nations are the only true landowners of our traditional territories. Our people have governed these lands since time immemorial, prior to colonial borders. Our rights cannot be implemented or respected without us, in substance and in process. We have fought for our rights in Parliament, on the land, and in the courts. We lift up generations of chiefs that have been taking these fights to the courts and winning. Our impressive successes to protect our traditional territories and courts that are not making, and people with judges we did not appoint, demonstrates the collective determination of all First Nations and our deep legal capacity to win when it counts. There are hundreds of court decisions affirming the substance and strength of our rights and title, and we keep winning. Continuing to ignore discriminatory infrastructure, education, health, and policing gaps leads to more court action, more legal fees, and project delays. It does not have to be this way, my friends. First Nations stand with all Canadians against Trump's illegal tariffs and colonial approach. We have always stood with Canada during tough times, during wars, and through the pandemic. And this is another one of those times. We support economic development and prosperity for all, but not at the expense of First Nations rights and the Crown's legal obligations. So just in closing, I want to come back to something else the late Justice Sinclair talked about. Now that we have learned the truth about the residential schools together, he said that we have to, all of us, get up and do the work. Justice Sinclair described the mountain and showed the path to the top. But he also said it was up to us to do the climbing. When he talked about us, Justice Sinclair was not referring only to Indigenous people. He was inviting all Canadians to do the climbing together. That long climb now rests with each and every one of us. So no matter how disappointing this budget is, we have to come back tomorrow. In Justice Sinclair's name, we must imagine what a world would look like where all of us have medicine, access to medicine and hospitals, access to proper food and nutrition, and a safe place to live. Not just a few, but truly all of us. And I think that is reconciliation. He prepared us that often we will have to speak about our rights and our vision for the future many times to many people. He told us to keep trying and to keep dreaming and to keep pushing because we have been given the gift to do that. We have a lot of ground to cover and we have a short time to do it. So we will keep getting up. Chiefs will keep working hard every day and putting themselves on the line to help communities and families. Our work is very complex and made much more intense by the many social, economic, and cultural challenges facing First Nations people. But by strengthening our relations, united, we can do anything. So I want to thank you all for being here today and having this discussion with us.
Thank you. Regional Chief Willie Moore will bring some quick comments here.
Are you good? You good? Good. I'll up to you.
Right on, thank you. National Chief for the media, Willie Moore, Manitoba AFN Regional Chief. Just a couple comments in relation to the budget. It's important to recognize, it's the first time in the budget where there was actually no Indigenous chapter within the budget. And although there was announcements made and investments, $2.3 billion for water and wastewater, $2.8 billion for Indigenous housing and infrastructure. But let's not forget, closing the infrastructure gap. 39% of our communities across Canada still don't have the broadband connection, like the rest of the world. The federal transfer payments, the transfers, in terms of healthcare services going to the province. And every other Canadian is getting an increase in support services, while the First Nations are getting the cuts. And then we become a jurisdictional hot potato with the provinces. Because we're a federal responsibility, and that's where the Crown has an obligation. Listening to to our leadership in each region, health investment, the national emergency on the mental health and addictions crisis, and that leads to policing. Child apprehension, the issues rise, child apprehension, the incarceration, the poverty increases. No investment in establishing the First Nations Procurement Authority, in relation to the report that was released a few days ago. The funds that are intended for the First Nation businesses. That was also not being supported. Policing, no investment in First Nation policing again. The rise in the escalation of the violence in our communities across Canada, it's real, and we need those supports, for our people to feel safe. And again, the common word that was, mentioned that the budget was generational investment. So our rights and priorities cannot continue to be ignored, and Canada has to live up to the obligation of the treaties. Canada, it's important to recognize Canada's foundation was built because of treaty. The recognition of our rights, the respect and the cooperation, and recognizing that that the reconciliation is about respect and it's about justice and meaningful engagement, and not unconditional generational investment that is tied to resource extraction. They just wanted to to touch on some few points for in relation to the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Regional Chief. So maybe what we'll do now is we'll open up the floor for some questions. We do have a mic here, and if I ask the media if you guys could introduce yourself and what outlet you're from, and then you can ask National Chief and Regional Chief some questions. So thank you.
Hi, National Chief. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Joyce Bishop Moore, CBC Indigenous. So speaking about the budget, you talked about, there's no new funding for Jordan's Principal, healthcare, education, the sunsetting programs, there's no mention as to if they're going to be renewed at all. The only new funding specifically that is announced for Indigenous people is the 2.3 for freshwater and then 10 million for major projects. What is this telling you about how the current government is viewing the relationship with First Nations?
Well, certainly it doesn't create further trust that's needed at this time, right? I know that the government has come and asked our chiefs, throughout the summer, just trust us, we're gonna get there together, but our gaps that we've experienced for a long time, for probably since the creation of this country, and the taking of all of our, always one side benefiting from the extraction of our lands. And it's First Nations lands from coast to coast to coast, no matter where you are. I know that that's an uncomfortable truth that Canada wants to ignore, but it is the truth, and you can't, poverty isn't an option anymore. And so we need a new, they need to make sure that they're remembering that First Nations people are on this land, and that programs and services are so important to First Nations people, to make sure that we're, giving First Nations the tools that they need. And, so much to say on that, I think, when it comes to reconciliation, this isn't the way. And I think that we could do better.
Right. Just to follow up, they're looking at the deficit as well. There was an increase in, what was allotted for liabilities moving forward. Is the plan, that First Nations are going to be going to court now in order to get what the budget is not allowing or allotting for?
Look, I think that there's a better way than going to court, and it's sitting down with First Nations and figuring out what they need. At the same time, nothing is off the table, and I think First Nations will always decide, especially when it comes to big projects or gaps in services. First Nations will decide what they want to do next, and they've been very successful in the courts. First Nations all over the country have pushed really hard for everybody else to move forward. And sadly, you try and do this work, and you try and come to the table to do good work and co-develop properly, and co-develop budgets like this properly in a good way. But at the same time, when that doesn't happen, what happens is court is the only option, it seems like. And for far too long, for many, many years, First Nations have been in courts, they're winning. And that's not even their courts, right? These are colonial court systems, and First Nations keep winning in them. And I think it says something for our country that we have to do better. Thank you.
Bonjour, Dylan Robertson in Woodhouse. For the Canadian press, I'd like to know what vision the government is articulating here when it comes to Indigenous peoples. We know with foreign aid, we have no sense of the priorities. We know with climate, we now have an indication, same with immigration. When it comes to the relationship with Indigenous peoples, do you feel like this budget actually set out where the current government is seeing a partnership, the tone that they want to set, especially after everything with major projects?
Well, I think feels like we're regressing a little bit, and trickle-down economics is not going to close the gaps that we experience for First Nations. And we've been saying this for many years already. So trickle-down economics will not work. And when it comes to, as well, I think this country has to get a handle on immigration. There's too many, and I think that's maybe why there's the fight with the provinces on, new investments going to them, because there's so many, the immigration is huge right now. And they need to, First Nations need to be a part of that. And we've been saying that for a long time. Yeah, they switched it up last year and added some stuff when newcomers are coming to Canada, that they now acknowledge a little bit more about First Nations, but it's got to be more than that. And in partnership with First Nations on how we grow this country or how we don't grow this country. And I think those conversations are long overdue. So a lot of work to do.
I'm curious what this 2% cut looks like 5 years down the road. What does this actually mean on reserves? What does this mean for urban First Nations?
First of all, I think I want to, as I said yesterday, I do lift up Minister Mandy Gulmasti for stopping the blow, if you will. I know every other department was cut 15%, and her department will be cut 2%. Where that comes, that's, that's a discussion that I do need to have with her. I had a preliminary discussion with her yesterday. She met with our chiefs last night at 8:30, so I thank her for that. But at the same time, yeah, where is the 2% cut and where is it going to come from? So I'm going to be very curious to hear that from the minister. I'm hoping you can ask her as well. No, thank you.
You have already outlined a few of these things, but it must be in terms of recent budgets with record investments, Indigenous priorities, that this one has to be probably maybe the most disappointing budget in a decade for First Nations. I mean, even the water and infrastructure and the water and sewer and infrastructure has now been looped all into one thing. It's only 2.3 billion. There's no new money for housing. They haven't spent money that was in 2 budgets ago that was allotted for the urban, rural, and urban housing. And yeah, so there's not much there. I guess where do you go from here with these lack of investments?
Well, we're going to have to continue to push, right? I know this country wants to build, build, baby, build, isn't that their motto? At the same time, it doesn't help when, I'm sitting in Parliament yesterday and they continue to talk about AI and increasing AI and talking about increasing technology. But meanwhile, I'm sitting there and I thought, some of our First Nations don't even have high-speed internet. Many of our First Nations don't. So let's go to the basics. So if First Nations don't have the basics, how are we to compete? And so again, I call on the federal government, where is our infrastructure then to even be a part of the conversation on AI? It was just like, it was so prevalent in the budget. So my thoughts.
And just as a follow-up, I don't know if your officials have had time to reach deep into the budget, but a lot of organizations, Indigenous ones, are really concerned about their core funding too that does come from the federal government. Have you been able to assess whether your funding for the AFN is stable or is it cut as well?
We haven't analyzed that, and I think that's a conversation I'll have to have with the minister as well. And and I know that we also get from other sources. We do foundational work, we do other work. So for sure we'll have to look at that, and I guess April 1st we'll know. Yeah, thank you.
I feel like can you hear me talking to someone?
There you go.
Thank you. So National Chief, I know you also presented to the House of Commons Committee on natural resources maybe a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And they've been hearing, of course, from a lot of CEOs of mining companies. This infrastructure problem, like even some of the CEOs said moving into Indigenous communities, where they're bringing in infrastructure and these Indigenous communities watching them walk in when they don't have the basics, makes it really hard to make a deal. I guess I'm just wondering, are First Nations even outfitted to participate in Prime Minister Carney's plan to push forward mineral resources at this point?
I think, First Nations for a long time, there's always been this push, and at the same time, we need targeted carve-outs. And I think that they're like, oh, well, you could just apply for all this, like on health, for instance, 5 billion, just apply for a piece of that. Well, you have to have a dedicated carve-out for First Nations in any budget because of the way that we created Canada, which means we've segregated, like First Nations people are the only people legislated around the entire world. In order for us, say we want to build, a medical clinic or a dental office or a McDonald's or a Tim Hortons, and we want to put it on a First Nation community, we have to go as First Nations people. Nobody else has to do this. Like no other Indigenous group in this country that I know of has to do this. But First Nations are, and a lot of Canadians don't know this, we have to go and ask the Minister of Indian Affairs for approval for a ministerial loan guarantee. So we have to, I know these are hard conversations to have. Many national chiefs before me have had them and have continued to have them, and I lift them all up for that. And I'm here now with a great team of people that are trying to do just that as well. I have great staff here, but at the same time, it's right. Like we have to have a real conversation about if we really want to talk about how to create this country. Give us that date for a First Ministers meeting. let's talk about that, about the fiscal realities of this country and allow us into the proper banking systems like everybody else. Segregation and pushing us down all the time does not help. At the same time, when we do these budgets, that's why AFN pushes so hard on carve-outs, because otherwise we just get squashed and pushed aside. People don't want to deal with the First Nations issues. So.
Yeah, so some of the mining companies, they're gonna need roads, they're gonna need railways, they're gonna need, electricity, sometimes natural gas, if they were gonna do refining. So they're gonna be looking for all that infrastructure to bring in, and First Nations don't have those things. So is this gonna just create more pressure on First Nations to make deals, because that's where the infrastructure is gonna come from negotiating with companies and getting some kind of dual use instead of from government?
Well, the federal government has a fiduciary responsibility, and I'll be continuing to meet with the Prime Minister all the time. I'm going to continue to hammer that and say, like, we have to do better. And here's the plan. We have the plan. Invest in this and let's figure this out. There was a commitment to close that gap to 2030. We're now in 2025. What's our plan to close that by 2030? And I hold them to that because that was their commitment. So thank you.
All right, thanks, National Chief.
Thank you.
Oh, we do have a reporter online that's wanting to ask the question, so we're going to open it up here.
All right.
Good morning. Can you hear me properly?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So I was at the budget yesterday and going through some of the pages. There's a section regarding housing in Indigenous communities, and there was a line that says we're going to invest X amount of money to lead consultations to evaluate the needs. There's a similar line when it comes to healthcare access in the north. But those things are actually very well documented. So what is your reaction when you see those measures being announced, when actually you've been underlining the needs and knowing the needs and quantifying them for years now?
Can we get a written response on that one, please, from my teams here? So we'll get you a written response on that later today, okay, from our experts. As you know, they've been up all night, so I'll get them to send you a written response on that and to all of us. Thank you.
But as a follow-up then, there are a lot of things missing from the budget. If we look at what you submitted before it was released, what do you think is the most significant thing that is absent from this budget? What was the one thing you could put in there if you could put one thing that's missing?
Well, I think give me $360 billion, I'll be so happy, because then we'd have roads and we'd have internet access for our kids, and we would have schools that our children desperately need, and we'd have proper water systems for our children and proper just everything that people take for granted, sewer and water. And yeah, there's a little bit of it, and we're happy for that start to that. And even on housing, that hopefully First Nations get some. We'll get some money from housing on that, but at the same time, that doesn't go far enough. We need a plan on $360 billion. We know it's not going to be over one budget, but let's start planning that and finding how long it's going to take for us to close that budget for our kids. Every one of us as Canadians, as First Nations, all of our children deserve a good childhood. They only get one, and we have to make sure that housing, that health, that their education systems and that the infrastructure of their schools are top-notch, just like anywhere else in this country. Let's do that for our kids, and that's the Canada that I want to see. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody. That concludes our press conference. If you guys want to have any one-on-ones, just let me know. So thank you.
All right, thanks. Thanks, everybody.
Yes. Okay. National Chief? National Chief, we have one. Oh. So just do it. Yeah.